Prometheion, the trickster Eon. In this chapter, we will continue to take our lead from Charles Fort, focusing on the three remaining theses that he advanced with regard to close encounters. The third thesis of Ford, which is astonishingly ahead of its time, pun intended, is that the super Tamerlanes of the preceding chapter were not necessarily coming from another planet, but from out of something akin to the Bermuda Triangle. Ford referred to the Bermuda Triangle by its old name, the Sargasso Sea. Ford speculated that these beings have access to our spatio-temporal dimension through a super Sargasso Sea. Furthermore, other strange things emerge out of the vortices of this cosmic Bermuda Triangle or are swallowed into it. In other words, Ford was already onto the idea that the close encounter phenomenon involves some complex manipulation of space-time on Earth by beings who can travel in space but are not extraterrestrials. This has, of course, been a central argument of the present study, especially from chapter 3 through chapter 5. In this first section of this chapter, we will combine this idea with a consideration of Ford's fourth thesis about UFOs. He thinks that the phenomenon is associated with some kind of trickster whose behavior can range from the display of wonder-evoking marvels to mischievous pranks to downright horrific malevolence. Ford did not come even close to articulating in what way this trickster is connected to the other aspects of the phenomenon, such as our being considered property or the tyrannical warfare waged by the others on this planet, especially by means of the religions that they revealed. But it is astonishing that he was able to see this at all, especially considering the fact that this was lost on all the other UFO researchers until the late 1960s. When John Keel and Jacques Vallée began to suspect something along the same lines. It is true that C.G. Young beat Keel and Vallée to this thesis by almost a decade, but no one in UFO research took him seriously at the time. Almost all other UFO researchers remained resistant to this idea for decades. Only now, after the findings at Skinwalker Ranch, to which we will return here, is this notion finally beginning to make a dent in the hard-headed UFO research community. The second section of this chapter will identify various aspects of the close encounter phenomenon that are not produced by the Nordic breakaway civilization, but are instead manifestations of the trickster. This is a difficult task, because the trickster is a superorganism capable of mimicry in the manner of the praying mantis or the octopus. It can emulate all aspects of the close encounter phenomenon, but it is still possible to detect the mimicry and identify a logic to the production of the simulacra that is fundamentally distinct from the modus operandi of the breakaway civilization and even has an adversarial relationship with it. Specifically, we will look at the women and men in black, shamanic transformations of this cosmic skinwalker into mantids and owls, mesmerizingly beautiful crop circles printed onto wheat fields as if they were made of binary code in a computer, and terrifying encounters with the diabolically playful orbs that have been seen around these fields. These will all be considered as so many tentacles of the trickster. In the third and final section of this chapter, we will see that what is still more astonishing is that Ford went even further than to suggest that some cosmic joker was toying with us in a way that was related to the phenomena that emerged from out of the super Sargasso Sea. It is in his fifth and final thesis that we see Charles Ford as nothing less than a revolutionary philosopher of science who is thinking along similar lines as Thomas Kuhn and Paul Feyerabend would think, but even more boldly and more than half a century in advance of them. Maybe Ford is also thinking backwards, fathoming the ontological depth of Heraclitus that was covered over by so many abstract pontificators from the Platonists and the Aristotelians onwards to Cartesian rationalism. This fifth thesis is that there are no laws of nature, but only habitual patterns of organization that form chaos into a cosmos based on the subconscious structure of the collective psyche of beings such as ourselves, including the all-too-human gods, angels, and demons, that have been piloting UFOs and treating us like cattle. It is not just that scientific paradigms change and condition our perception of nature in one or another limited way, as Thomas Kuhn would argue. Rather, more in anticipation of Paul Feyerabend, Ford goes so far as to say that our paradigms, which he calls dominants, actually shape a field of raw energy and potentiality into a certain order that counts for a law like nature, in the first place. When there is a change of the dominant, which includes not just a prevailing scientific paradigm, but entrenched belief systems in every domain, including religion and politics, then the world itself changes and other experiences become possible. There could, for example, be a world where it is possible for us to routinely pass through what we now take to be solid, objects. Although such an experience of reality, might become quite disorienting. The atoms, that constitute these seemingly solid objects do not really exist. At its most fundamental, or rather at its most abyssal level, the quantum potential of the cosmos is an energetic chaos, a seething dynamic medium that inextricably interacts with the psyche, albeit on a subconscious and collective or intersubjective level, in order to shape what we take to be reality, In the third section of this chapter, it will be suggested that the trickster, who Ford was already onto, has as the basic motivation of its multifarious machinations the destabilization of dominants, which have been entrenched for too long and are rendering life stagnant and sterile. If we were to understand this and redefine our relationship with this trickster to one that is more constructive than the fortress mentality of the breakaway civilization with its cyclopean architecture, then the skinwalker, may transform as well. Scientific studies at Skinwalker Ranch reach the conclusion that this trickster is a precognitive sentient phenomenon, PSP, and perhaps its precognitive or anticipatory mindedness is the same quality that the Greeks referred to as Prometheia. Maybe we can bring a new and more dynamic dominant into being, in the context of which the trickster will appear in her most beneficently humanitarian form, Prometheus. Is Prometheus an avatar, an egregoric projection, or a shamanic mask of a more primordial trickster who could present herself to us as Prometheia, the Aeon? The same Aeon that Heraclitus referred to as the childlike player of the cosmic game. The trickster from the Super Sargasso Sea. As we have seen, Ford does sometimes describe the pilots of the super constructions, as conquerors from outer space, However, his most interesting speculations about where they are coming from or going to are more insightful and even more ahead of their time than the extraterrestrial hypothesis that he also entertains. In the 1920s, Charles Ford is already considering the possibility that close encounters involve the traversing of other dimensions of space-time on Earth itself. Ford develops the idea that beings and things from another dimension might cross over into ours in a way that presents us with as much a mystery as deep-sea creatures are confronted with by beings from Earth's surface coming down into their medium. As a library-dwelling bookworm, Ford followed the literature of quantum physics as it first began to be published in the scientific journals of the day. He thought that phenomena such as superposition and entanglement could make reasonable almost any miracle, and that the quantum theory is a doctrine of magic, or an attempted systemization of the principles of magic, such that physics was becoming occultism, With a view to the horizons opened up by this new physics, Ford suggests, before any other well-known writer, that rather than coming from other planets, some of the aerial phenomena may be coming to this Earth, like things rising to an attenuated medium and exploding, sometimes incandescently, as they cross over into our spatio-temporal dimension in certain regions. His focus shifts from outer space, to the bottom of a sea, and to things, that can adapt to our conditions, but that are actually from the fifth dimension. Ford even connects this fifth dimensional crossing in and out of our 4D spacetime to the kinds of disappearances that were examined in Chapter 4 and that are connected to missing time, in abductions. It may be that witnesses have seen human beings dragged from our own existence, either into the objectionable fourth dimension, perhaps then shifting into the fifth, or up to the sky by some exploring thing. I have data, but they are from the records of psychic research. For instance, a man has been seen walking along a road. Sudden disappearance. As we have seen, sometimes such disappearing people appear in another place and time. They are spit out of the fifth dimension into which they were pulled, as in one case that Ford recounts of a startled and confused naked man who suddenly appeared in the midst of a shocked crowd in the middle of a bustling city streets, as if he were teleported from elsewhere, perhaps from his bathtub. Was this a prank? By whom? The most fascinating of Ford's speculations on the phenomenon does not concern the super Tamilians, or hordes of angels, enforcing their colonial regime with their celestial armies. Rather, it is the suggestion that something may be playing games with us from out of this fifth dimension. He envisions this thing as a transmedium superorganism, as one with a shape-shifting power, from which all of the distinct paranormal abilities that we encounter are derived, as aspects or subsets of it. The shape-shifting of werewolves, is of this nature, but an atavistic lower order of it. Ford makes an analogy to the camouflage capacity of certain insects, which is also relevant to the evolutionary dimension of these remarks on psychophysical transmedium, capacities. Insofar as the word imagination, comes from the word imago for the perfect form of an insect as compared to its larval stage. I have thought of leaf insects as pictorial representations wrought in the bodies of insects by their imaginations, or by the imaginative qualities of the substances of their bodies. Back in plastic times, when insects were probably not so set in their ways as they now are, the real, as it is called, or the objective, the external, the material, cannot be absolutely set apart from the subjective or the imaginary. But there are quasi-attributes of the imaginary. There have been occurrences that I think were transmediumizations, because I think they were marked by indications of having carried over from an imaginative origin into physical being, or into what is called real life, the quasi-attributes of their origin. The games that this kind of hyperdimensional shifter plays with its capacities for transubstantiation are often quite diabolical. As we have seen, the thing is sometimes responsible for terrifying teleportation, of an individual from one place and time to another. Sometimes such tricksters, with a flaming process, consume men and women, but mostly pick out women, Ford is talking about cases of supposedly spontaneous combustion, which he does not think are so spontaneous. Ford documents a number of such cases that took place in Northumberland, England, in the winter of 1904 to 1905. To his mind, they represent the use of pyrokinesis on hapless humans, or rather, the transubstantiation of human cells into fire, by some thing that finds this all terribly funny, maybe because it occasionally becomes bored to death by the spectacle of human life on this planet or in this time. That qualifier is appropriate because Ford actually had the foresight to consider the possibility that this thing or these things are superorganisms from the future. Ford lamented that in the biology of his time, when Darwinism was just becoming the established theory, there is no place for the influence of the future upon the present. He starts thinking in the direction of a possible influence of future organisms upon the evolutionary development of beings in what would be the past, from the perspective of such an organism or superorganism. Ford describes this as a super-embryonic development, to which the human beings are being subjected as cellular units by one integrating organism, whose pulse can be felt in various paranormal phenomena. This superorganism from the future is pulling us towards it like a magnetic attractor. We accept the process of selection, not to anything loosely known as environment. Ford writes in a critique of Darwin, but relative to underlying schedule and design, predetermined and supervised, as it were, but by nothing that we conceive in anthropomorphic terms. This process of awakening, will end with us becoming one with that thing, an end of alienation through transformation into what had been encountered, sometimes closely encountered, as the alien. It is reversing itself through us, and we have heard its pulse, through the ectoplasm of Earth's embryo. The watery womb of these coming things is the Super Sargasso Sea, Ford's metaphor for a transdimensional Bermuda Triangle. In Chapter 4, we saw how people and things pass through vortices in space-time that are opened by the hyperdimensional technology of UFO bases. It was argued that anomalous artifacts and footprints in the geological record reveal that, in some cases, these persons and objects associated with them can slip millions of years into the past. If that is the case, then why not things from millions of years in the future slipping back in time? The most likely place to find evidence of this would not be on land. it would be in our oceans. About 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by oceans, and only 5% of the oceans have been explored. For some reason, our scientific community still knows far less about our own oceans than NASA knows about the other planets in our solar system. Moreover, as we saw in Chapter 4, based on the fact that perhaps as many as half of UFOs have been sighted are USOs, or transmedium vehicles entering and exiting Earth's oceans, we can safely assume that there are at least as many hyperdimensional bases under the oceans as there are on land. An examination of the underwater base construction capability of the US Navy provided some frame of reference for how sophisticated such bases could be. A base of this kind could be producing the spatio-temporal vortex known as the Bermuda Triangle. What could have slipped through vortices of that kind from the future oceans of the Earth? Well, to begin with, cephalopods such as the octopus.